Good evening and welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Amanda Bowen. As a reminder, you can give us a call anytime to get your latest forecast. That phone number is 1-800-472-0391. You can also join us online to find your latest watches, warnings, and advisories for your area, as well as the latest 7-day forecast at weather.gov/Alaska. If you have any feedback, comments for us, feel free to email us anytime at nws.ar.tv@noaa.gov. Taking a look at the hazardous weather that we are expecting for tonight, we have 2 winter storm warnings in effect for the northwestern portion of the state. The furthest west warning is going to be in effect until midnight tonight. That's that area that's just north of Kotzebue, stretching west to Point Hope. That's going to be for snow, expecting 2 to 4 inches of additional snowfall through midnight tonight. For the zone further east, including Ambler on the map, we'll have snow as well with an additional 3 to 5 inches of snow. And for both of these areas, the areas from Ambler to Noatak and south are actually expecting rain. So that snow is going to be happening north of Ambler and north of Noatak in those areas. For the yellow, further east, we have a winter weather advisory for snow, and that's with 3 to 5 inches of snow expected along the Dalton Highway with local amounts up to 8 inches. That's going to be mainly north of Wiseman in the area, with areas south of Wiseman expecting mostly rain with this system. That advisory is going to be in effect until 6 a.m. on Monday. So tonight, all the way through the day tomorrow, and Sunday night into Monday morning a little bit. Finally, we have a flood watch in effect for the Western Kenai Peninsula for the Anchor River. We are looking at the possibility of an ice jam on the river causing some minor flooding. That's going to be in effect until 8 a.m. on Sunday. If you have any information about flooding in the area, please call 877-696-7748 to report it. Or you can email the River Forecast Center at nws.ar.aprfc@noaa.gov. Taking a look at satellite imagery for today, we have low pressure that's moving north along the west coast that's bringing that precipitation into the western and northern portions of the state. That winter storm warning, winter weather advisory level snow that we talked about, and that rain further south from the snow. Further south, we have a trough and cold front that's going to be bringing some precipitation into the Alaska Peninsula. So for today, we have that low pressure system over the west coast, over the Seward Peninsula today, with a mix of rain and snow to the north of that low, and then changing over to all snow as we get further north, and rain to the south of the low. Another low pressure system in the Aleutians today, with a cold front out in front of it, and that bringing rain to the Aleutians. High pressure in command over the Gulf, bringing mostly clear skies to South Central and the Gulf Coast, as well as the Panhandle for the rest of today. For tonight, we expect that low pressure system over the Seward Peninsula to mostly stay in place. So a rain-snow mix right around the low with snow mostly north of the low. Again, that's where we have that winter storm warning, winter weather advisories in effect. That low pressure system in the Aleutians is going to be moving north, so some showers for the Aleutians tonight. And then we have our cold front across the Alaska Peninsula with rain along the cold front, but high pressure still remaining dominant over the Gulf, Panhandle, and South Central. For Wednesday, low pressure that was over the Seward Peninsula will continue to move north with an occluded front stretching south from that low. So we'll continue to see precipitation over the west coast of the state with rain south switching to snow as we get up to about the Seward Peninsula. Low pressure that was in the Aleutians continues to weaken and move into the Bering Sea. So not a lot of impact from it there, but we can see our next low pressure system moving northward into the Aleutians, and that's going to bring some rain and gusty winds to the central and western Aleutians. Finally, low pressure system over Kodiak Island tomorrow is going to start spreading rain back into the northern Gulf Coast and even the northern peninsula as that high pressure that was over the Gulf starts to shift southeastward towards Canada and the Pacific Northwest. For Monday, high pressure shifting further to the southeast, so we'll see showers and rain with a trough along the North Gulf Coast. Low pressure over the central part of the interior along the Canadian border, bringing snow and a rain-snow mix as well as rain to the eastern portions of the mainland. High pressure in command over the northern portions of the state over the north slope, so could see a little bit of gusty winds up there, but not much in the way of precipitation. And then finally, we'll have our low pressure system moving east. It was just south of the western Aleutians. It'll be moving east, so rain and showers spreading across the entire Aleutians for Monday. Low temperatures for Sunday morning, we are taking a look at in the 30s across most of the area from the Aleutians up the Alaska Peninsula and into the YK Delta. We can see the impacts of that front we'll have across the state as we see north of the Brooks Range is quite a lot colder for the north slope, with low temperatures Sunday morning around 0 to just below 0 in the negative single digits. And for the Panhandle, lows in the 30s to even around 40 for Sunday morning. High temperatures on Sunday afternoon, looking at 40s for much of the state, even some 50s and 60s for a few spots for the Panhandle. But again, cold air remains very well in place north of the Brooks Range. So the North Slope looking at single digits to teens for high temperatures on Sunday afternoon. Monday morning, not a whole lot of change expected. Still a lot of 30s to around 40 degrees, stretching all the way from the Aleutians to the West Coast, South Central, as well as the Panhandle, with cold air a little bit further south now. So for northern parts of the Seward Peninsula, looking at the low teens for lows, and then still around 0 degrees north of the Brooks Range. For Monday afternoon, a little bit cooler than Sunday, but still lots of temperatures in the 40s south of the Brooks Range, 50s, even upper 50s for the Panhandle, and still quite chilly for the North Slope with high temperatures in the single digits and low teens.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to aviation weather. For Sunday morning, quite a lot of IFR conditions stretching from the Aleutians up through the Bering Sea and across the entirety of the West Coast, as well as up the Yukon River to the south side of the Brooks Range. Also IFR conditions across the northern Alaska Peninsula and much of the North Gulf Coast and the coastal areas of the Panhandle for Sunday morning. Some improvements Sunday afternoon, still a lot of IFR, but we'll see some improvement to marginal conditions for the western half of the Kenai Peninsula, stretching across Cook Inlet and to much of the Kuskokwim River area. Still IFR conditions along the west coast, stretching down through the Bering Sea and into the Aleutians, as well as the immediate Panhandle coast. VFR conditions actually for the higher terrain of the Panhandle. For Monday morning, IFR moving back into most of the mainland areas and into the Bering Sea and Aleutians, as well as the Panhandle, with the rest of the state where it's not seeing IFR should see marginal conditions for Monday morning. Improvement to marginal conditions across much of the mainland for Monday afternoon, with IFR conditions still along the immediate Yukon Delta and Aleutians, as well as the northern Gulf Coast and into the Panhandle for Monday afternoon. Pass conditions for Sunday: Anaktuvuk Pass expected to be IFR on Sunday, as well as Adigan Pass IFR on Sunday. Lake Clark and Merrill passes both IFR, but improving to VFR Sunday afternoon. However, we'll still see IFR throughout the day along the eastern entrance to Lake Clark Pass. Sunday for Rainy Pass looks marginal conditions. IFR conditions Sunday at Windy Pass, marginal conditions Sunday at Isabel Pass, and VFR conditions expected on Sunday for Mentasta Pass. Tanita Pass on Sunday, marginal deteriorating to IFR in the afternoon. Portage doing the opposite, IFR in the morning, improving to marginal in the afternoon, but still IFR all day along the eastern entrance to Portage Pass, and Chilkoot and White passes both VFR on Sunday. Freezing levels, we have that overrunning situation again where we've got the cold air at the surface, but then warmer air above it. So surface freezing levels stretching from the western Aleutians across the Bering Sea, up the west coast and into the interior on the southern end of the Brooks Range, as well as across much of the northern Gulf Coast, but warmer air moving in above that. So 2,000 feet stretching from the western Aleutians across the Bering Sea to the Seward Peninsula and the south side of the Brooks Range, 4,000 feet from the Alaska Peninsula through the northern Gulf Coast and up to the Yukon Flats, 6,000 feet along the Canadian border with the mainland, and about 8,000 feet across the Panhandle for Sunday morning. Isolated moderate icing expected across most of the state, mostly the mainland and the Aleutians on Sunday, with some considerable moderate above about 8,000 feet stretching from the northern Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island north across the Kuskokwim River area to about the Yukon River north of the Alaska Range. For the jet stream, we'll have our main jet over Western Canada on Sunday, so about 125 to 135 knots out of the northwest over Western Canada. Over the Alaska flying area, 85 to 95 knots out of the south coming into the northern Gulf, about 70 knots out of the south and southwest for the west coast, and about 90 knots out of the southwest and west along the eastern North Slope areas. At 9,000 feet, not a whole lot of wind over the Alaska flying area. We've got 20 to 30 knots out of the south coming into the northern Gulf Coast, as well as 20 to 30 knots out of the west for the eastern North Slope and the Yukon Flats. And then a maximum of between 60 and 70 knots out of the west and northwest, just west of the western Aleutians. At 3,000 feet, not a whole lot of wind at all over the Alaska flying area. 20 to maybe as high as 30 knots of wind out of the south coming into the northern Gulf Coast, into the eastern side of Kodiak Island, as well as some 20 to 30 knots out of the northwest for the western Aleutians. Pretty light winds elsewhere, though. For turbulence, we've got a couple of areas over the western Aleutians, considerable moderate below about 4,000 feet, and also some considerable moderate below about 4,000 feet across Kodiak Island, the northern Alaska Peninsula, and stretching northward on the north side of the Alaska Range. Stay tuned for more Alaska weather.
Dual polarization technology is a major upgrade to the current radar system. It allows forecasters a better idea of what's actually out there and can help keep you safe.
Current radar technology transmits and receives information in the horizontal direction, which is very limited. Dual polarization technology, in addition to the horizontal, transmits and receives vertical energy, which allows forecasters to get information about the size, shape, and phase of the precipitation. We can use that information to better determine the precipitation type to expect at your given location.
There you have it. This new technology is currently being installed in radars across the country and is already being used by National Weather Service forecasters to produce better, more accurate forecasts. Learn more here and follow us. Want to know about the future of weather radar? Well, the National Severe Storms Lab has it here with its new phased array radar. Let's check it out.
It's a non-moving radar. It has 4 faces of the antenna, each pointing in different directions. One of the big advantages is that we're seeing so far, it can sample the area around the radar in less than a minute, maybe even a half a minute. And this is 5-6 times faster than what they can do today.
NSSL is leading the development of future weather radar with this project. Learn more here and follow us. The Storm Prediction Center is one of the NOAA weather partners. They are located in the National Weather Center in Norman, Oklahoma. Greg Carbon gives us a glimpse into what the SPC does.
Our mission is to analyze and forecast severe thunderstorms and the potential for tornadoes, large hail, and damaging winds from those thunderstorms across the lower 48 states, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. One of the primary missions of the Storm Prediction Center is the issuance of severe thunderstorm and tornado watches across the country when conditions appear to be coming together to support the development of severe thunderstorms and tornadoes.
The world-class meteorologists in the Storm Prediction Center specialize in severe weather and keeping you safe. Learn more here and follow us.
The National Severe Storms Lab is working on increasing the lead time for severe weather warnings. The national average for tornado warnings is currently 13 minutes, but more notice would be helpful, especially for those in charge of moving large groups to shelter. Warn on Forecast will help forecasters issue hazardous weather warnings earlier. The project will give them more info about the chances of strong winds, large hail, and even tornadoes.
Currently, warnings are created by forecasters looking at the atmosphere outside, understanding its volatility, and then comparing that to how they see the Doppler radar presenting what's going on inside thunderstorms. Warn on Forecast is an idea where we're going to take the massive amounts of satellite, radar, and surface data and stick them all into a very high resolution prediction model. And then by producing new forecasts every 15 or 20 minutes, the forecasters hopefully will be able to use that model to produce warnings that extend out to an hour.
Before the National Weather Service can use this tool, it must be developed and tested. One big challenge will be deciding how to get the model predictions to the forecasters.
I'm going to keep this one very low. I'm just adjusting the track.
These hazardous weather prediction models are going to produce a huge amount of output. And this fire hose of data is just too much for forecasters to handle in real time quickly. So in order to help deal with that, NSSL has developed a related project called Facets. And Facets is the methodology which will enable forecasters to focus very quickly on the most important threats.
Once Warn on Forecast and Facets are proven to be reliable and effective, then forecasters will be better able to inform you of threats nearby. Learn more here and follow us.
The Hazardous Weather Test Bed is located at the National Weather Center in Norman, Oklahoma. It is used for experiments that will allow forecasters to learn and apply new technologies.
The Hazardous Weather Test Bed is a really unique space throughout all of NOAA. And this is where the researchers and the operational folks come together in a common space to solve operational problems and to test new research tools that the research community is working on. The goal is to accelerate the transfer from research to operations of the newest tools and techniques.
People come from around the world to collaborate on this unique project.
And we can bring together not only NOAA people, but also university people, faculty, researchers, private sector meteorologists, folks working in other countries in meteorology, forecasters can all come together and focus on what the problem of the day is with the forecasters.
Each spring, several experiments occur in the hazardous weather test bed. Learn more here and follow us.
What are you looking at? And what are you ignoring? Did you notice the NOAA logo in the corner? Forecasters have a lot of information in front of them too. Every second counts during severe weather, and decisions about where to focus are constantly being made. This could be even more challenging in the future. Phased array radar will produce 4 to 6 times more information than what we have now, which brings us to the question researchers are hoping to answer. Will more radar information affect forecasters' decisions?
From our past experiments, we've learned a lot about how forecasters think during the warning decision process, but we've also learned that those thought processes are very complex, and for that reason, we need a better way to be able to track forecasters' cognitive activity.
Inbounds and possibly golf ball sized hail.
And eye tracker is a piece of technology that is used to determine in real time where someone's eye gaze is located. And these eye trackers are typically video-based, which means a camera sits below a computer monitor, and with infrared light and vector analysis, we can determine where a person is looking and how their eyes are moving.
Eye tracking is already being used in the medical field and air traffic control. Using similar research methods, NSSL is discovering the benefit for weather forecasting too. Phased array radar will give forecasters a lot more to think about. Understanding their decision-making process will help researchers develop even more user-friendly tools. So what's the benefit for you? Even better weather warnings. To learn more, check us out online and follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for a look at your marine forecast. Starting out with the sea ice edge, we'll see the edge has continued to move north and northwest with southerly winds in place over the last few days. In addition, the sea ice in Bristol Bay has moved north away from the Alaska Peninsula, which has opened up the way to Naknek. Over the next few days, expect those southerly winds to continue in general, so expect that to continue to push the ice edge further north and northwest over the Alaskan portion of the Bering Sea. For southeast, on Sunday, expect generally pretty light winds, 10 to 15 knots out of the west and south and southwest over the inside waterways, and seas just 5 to 8 feet over the Gulf and 2 to 3 feet over those inside waterways. Not a whole lot of change on Monday, although the wind direction does change to some degree. We'll see winds generally out of the south to a little bit of southeast, 10 to 15 knots, seas 6 to 8 feet over the Gulf, and still 2 to 3 feet over the inside waterways. For Sunday across South Central, we've got a couple of different weather systems in place that are going to be affecting the wind directions here. So for the northern and northeastern Gulf, winds are going to be on the lighter side and a bit variable at about 10 knots. Winds further west in the Gulf out of the southeast at 15 to 25 knots, and winds for Cook Inlet out of the northeast at about 10 knots. Seas over the Gulf just 4 to 5 feet, and over Cook Inlet and Prince William Sound about 2 feet on Sunday. A little bit of a more consistent wind direction going into Monday, with generally easterly and southeasterly winds over the Gulf at 10 to 20 knots. Still northeasterly winds over Cook Inlet at about 10 knots. Seas, not a whole lot of change, 4 to about 6 feet over the Gulf on Monday. For the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, we see winds on the south side of the peninsula out of the southeast at 10 to 20 knots. And then in Bristol Bay, about 15 knots out of the southeast. But further south on the north side of the Alaska Peninsula, 10 knots out of the north. Seas on the Pacific side of the peninsula, 7 to 10 feet, and just 1 to 3 feet on the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula. For Monday, Winds generally out of the east and northeast, 15 to about 20 knots. Seas pretty consistent, 7 to 9 feet on the south side of the peninsula, 3 to 4 feet on the north side. Looking ahead at the Aleutians for Sunday. For the eastern Aleutians, expect winds around 15 knots out of the southeast, but the central and western Aleutians will have different influence. So winds there more out of the west and northwest, 10 knots for the central Aleutians, 25 knots to 35 knots for the western Aleutians. And then we'll have 8 to 10 foot seas on the south side of the Aleutians, 5 to 6 feet on the north side, and about 9 to 11 feet for the western Aleutians on Sunday. For Monday, winds out of the north a little bit more, so northeast for the eastern Aleutians and northwest a little bit for the western Aleutians, 25 to about 30 knots of wind across the board. Seas 10 to 12 feet for most of the Aleutians, but increasing more in the western Aleutians to about 17 feet on Monday. For the west coast, winds generally out of the south, like we talked about for that sea ice edge, so 10 to as much as about 25 knots of wind. Seas outside of the ice edge, 3 to 6 feet on Sunday. As we look ahead to Monday, we see those winds shift a little bit, but that's going to be temporary. So we're going to have some north winds anywhere from about 10 to 25 knots on Monday. Seas still 3 feet right along the ice edge and 6 to 7 feet a little bit further out into the Bering Sea. For the Arctic coast, winds generally out of the north on Sunday. So for the north slope, 10 to 15 knots, and for the northwest coast, 25 to 30 knots, so a little stronger there. For Monday, we're looking at 10 knots still along the north slope and 20 to 25 knots along the northwest coast, so coming down a little bit for the northwest coast on Monday. Reviewing what we have in store for tonight, we've got low pressure centered over the Seward Peninsula. That's going to be bringing snow to the north and rain to the south of it. Also rain along the Alaska Peninsula, and low pressure moving into Bristol Bay. Thanks so much for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.